It's my great privilege to introduce you to Richard Holloway.
On July the 8th, 2009, I was standing in a graveyard in the middle of England when my phone went. And it was my American daughter Annie phoning me on her birthday. And when I tried to explain where I was, I burst into tears. She immediately phoned her mother and said, "Get hold of Daddy, he's crying in an English graveyard." But it wasn't just any graveyard, it was the graveyard of the Society of the Sacred Mission, an Anglican religious order that had been formed at the end of the 19th century to train what were known as boys of the humbler classes for the Anglican ministry. It had been founded by a remarkable Victorian genius called Herbert Kelly, whom we called HK, who thought it odd that God only called middle-class boys to the Anglican ministry. And so he started this order, and in 1903 it moved to this enormous mansion, Kelham Hall, built by Gilbert Scott. If you want to know what the building looks like, go and visit St Pancras Hotel in London and miniaturize it. Kelham's a slightly less manic version of that wonderful hotel, and when I pass St Pancras, I always blow it a wee kiss. The society came there because it was growing, came there in 1903, and they built an enormous chapel behind the main house with the second biggest concrete dome in England. That's why Father Hilary used to quip, "We give our life, we give our all inside this great big tennis ball." I went there aged 14 to give my life, to give my all inside that great big tennis ball. And it didn't quite work out the way I thought it would when I was that wee, zealous, dedicated boy from Alexandria in Dumbartonshire. And I've been going back to that graveyard because the society itself left Kelham in 1973. They'd been there for 70 years. They left Kelham. It's now the headquarters of Newark and Sherwood District Council. And I go back, they kept the graveyard, and I go back and I stand in the graveyard, I scrape the lichen off the 35, there are 35 gravestones, and I remember all the old monks who taught me, and I weep, because I know that what my journey took me away from would disappoint them. And I wrote this book to try and find out what it was in me that would have provoked that disappointment. This book is not an autobiography. An autobiography is usually, especially if it's a political one, an exercise in self-justification or exculpation. This is a memoir. A memoir is trying to find out who the author was, not trying to glorify what the author was, but trying to discover what the author was. We live forwards but understand our lives backwards. And an old man now, I spent the last 10 years trying to figure out why it was that the calling I gave my life to, in a sense, came unstuck at the very end, and I walked away from the work of a lifetime. Not in disgrace, but there was quite a lot of noise behind me, and I took to the hills, and I tried to walk myself into understanding. And I discovered, in fact, a number of things about myself that I'd had a kind of hunch about, but had never quite formalized, and the walking did it for me. And I discovered, actually, that I was probably unsuited for the big job I ended up having. We need institutions in life. We are very disordered creatures, we human animals, because we have capacities that inflate our selfishness, our greed, our ugliness, our cruelty. And so we create institutions to try to control those appetites. Religion, education, politics, economics, these are all ways in which we try to control what the prayer book calls the unruly wills and affections of sinful men. And the people who are good at running institutions need to be people who revere tradition and are good at maintaining tradition, at holding it on. I discovered, in fact, that I have a kind of disloyal gene. I'm not capable of loyalty to institutions. I realized early on that I wasn't interested in keeping the rules. I didn't even know what most of the rules were. And that was all right when I was a priest. It's a bit more difficult when you're actually in charge of the institution that's supposed to be enforcing the rules, if you yourself become a kind of scandal because you no longer, if you ever did, actually believe in the rules. And one of the problems with institutions, of course, is that they were formed to deliver a vision, a purpose, a sacred view, and they end up existing in order to exist. And they end up also freezing history. They preserve not only the best of the past, but the worst of the past, which is why we always need awkward degenerates, disloyal to the institution, who will maybe bring it the future. I realize that, in fact, I'm that kind of a person. I'm not capable of obedience. That's one reason why I think it was a mistake for me to become a bishop. I was vain about it, ambitious about it. Mainly, I wanted to come back to Edinburgh because I love this city almost more than I love anything else on earth, and it got me back. But I realized the more into it I became that I was not the kind of a person who was constitutionally capable of thinking this institution contained absolute truth, was lacking in cruelty, and could therefore simply be maintained and celebrated and defended. And I became a bit of a scandal to people. The thing actually broke down for me completely at the Lambeth Conference of 1998. Lambeth conferences are kind of great gatherings of Anglican bishops from all over the globe, all 700 of them. Just imagine 700 men in pink frocks in student accommodation in the University of Canterbury. I still have sleepless nights at the thought. I quite enjoyed Lambeth 88 when the big subject was the ordination of women. We managed to do a classic Anglican fudge on that. We kicked it into the long grass by appointing a commission, and that bought us time to let it happen in places where they wanted it to happen, and places that didn't want it to happen, well, it didn't happen in those places. In 1998, the hot issue was the ordination, the sheer human acceptance of gay people. And I expected the same thing would happen. I thought that they would appoint a commission. I knew there would be disagreement because the world, the Anglican world, was grievously divided on the subject. It didn't work out like that. The Lambeth Conference of 1998 was a hate fest. It was the most unpleasant experience of my life to sit there in an August afternoon just enduring the hatred of 500 out of the 700 bishops pouring against the class of person called a homosexual, a gay person, someone who loves a member of their own sex. And something died inside me. And I wanted to get in the car and come away. It was the Archbishop of Canada who prevailed upon me to stay. At a primates meeting, I was a primate. We're called primates, Anglican archbishops. The word says it all. There was a primates meeting at the end of the conference, which I stayed on for, and I had a wee punch-up with George Carey. And I came home, and I wrote a book, because it seemed to me that we'd got ourselves into a terrible fankle in religion. We had used God as a way of reinforcing what I was absolutely certain were purely human prejudices. And this is one of the troubles with religion, because it believes in certain sacred texts that were formed 2,000-3,000 years ago. And not only do they carry great values through time, they also carry great prejudices through time. And it became almost impossible for the church to undo the prejudice against women. It's proving almost impossible, and I don't see it happening anytime soon, to undo the prejudice against gay people, because there aren't any texts in the Bible that you can actually use as a stalking horse to get out of it. There are one or two obliging things said about women in the Bible, and we latched on one of them from Galatians. In Christ there is neither bond nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female. Thank God we found something in the Bible that lets us to say it's all right to ordain women. There's nothing in the Bible that helps you say that about gay people. So I wrote a book called Godless Morality, wondering if we couldn't keep the big God trump card out of it and decide these things on the basis of our pure humanity, our desire to flourish and love and be neighborly towards each other. And the book got me into trouble. 1990 year was the year of the triple fatwa, one from the Archbishop of Canterbury in the town of Dundee. He got out of there alive, only just. The other was delivered by the Archbishop of Southeast Asia, who told me during a primates meeting in Cumberland Lodge in Windsor Park, when we were in the Queen's urinal. He told me that I was filling hell with gay people because I was giving them permission to commit a sin that the Bible said would get them into hell because no sodomite can enter the kingdom of heaven. I resisted the temptation to deck him and just let him piss out his gall and wormwood. But when some of my own clergy announced that the Diocese of Edinburgh was vacant because it was held by a heretic, an apostate, one of whom was at my dinner table that night, I decided I better go. I'm becoming an object of offense to too many good people, and I don't like hurting people. I've hurt a lot of people. I've caused a lot of pain. I don't do it naturally. So I decided time to move out and hit the hills, which is what I did. People assume that I lost God. What I lost was religion and bad ethics. I have a kind of tentative hold on God. With Wittgenstein, I believe that if every scientific question is answered, the basic problem still remains. Because it's not the what of the universe, it's the that of the universe that is the mystical. And that's what keeps me poised on the brink of transcendence. And the other thing I'm left with is a glimpse down the centuries to the shore of an ancient sea. And I see the man Jesus kindling a fire, always kindling a fire. And that's enough for me.